What children learn in ESL kindergarten. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about what you can expect to teach in an ESL kindergarten, and also I'm going to break down each age to let you know kind of what level you should be teaching at. Every kindergarten is different, and your kindergarten level may be easier or more difficult depending on what your curriculum is. So just take everything I say with a grain of salt. So the following information is based off my experience in my kindergarten, so please bear that in mind when listening to the video. I'd use the information I'm going to give you as a way to gauge what you plan to teach in your lessons, depending on what your kindergarten and students are like. Okay, so we'll start with students that are 2 to 3 years old. So generally, they are just settling into the kindergarten environment, and it's less about learning and more about getting used to kindergarten itself. You should think of it as more like English immersion. So you're not going to be pointing at the board saying, look, say this. You know, the kids are just going to be screaming and not really listening to you, and you know, maybe they have a little bit of attention sometimes, but it's more about them having a good time and just getting used to the situation. Social skills wise, the main focus of that year will be meeting new children for the first time and learning how to share and things of that nature. Independence. So the aim for that will be for the children to be comfortable without their parents, and they'll be encouraged to try new things for the first time. In terms of English, everything will be very visual with a focus on basic phrases. You should aim to build their vocabulary more than anything else, because they're not really able to grasp grammar yet, not even in their native language. So at this stage, just communicate with the children as much as possible while looking after them. Don't worry about the children repeating straight away, and just try to encourage it, but don't push too hard. Sometimes you'll have quiet children too, which is okay. Just don't force them to speak English, because once you start forcing things, children don't want to do it. So just give them space, and within time, your children will start speaking. Reading wise, words will be used on the flashcards, but children will not be able to read anything at all yet. Teachers might focus on recognizing letters and numbers, but it's mainly English immersion. As for writing, children should be encouraged to color and paint, but their motor skills aren't ready yet, and they're still too weak to be able to write or hold a pencil properly. So just concentrate on strengthening their fine motor skills. So you can do this by simple things like playing catch, or again, painting. They don't have to hold the pencil correctly. Just have them use their hands and get their, build up their fine motor skills and muscles in their hands, so that a few months down the line, a year down the line, they'll be able to use a pencil, or at least hold one. As for numbers, focus on the numbers 1 to 10 and don't go any higher. If you have advanced students, maybe you can go 1 to 15, but I wouldn't recommend going any higher than that. Children still might not recognize the number itself, but they should be able to count from 1 to 10 by the end of the year. Physical notes. Children are being left alone for the first time in their life, so many children will cry a lot. So just try to be the one to comfort them. The first job will be for them to trust you, and you'll need to change diapers, you'll need to teach them how to use, a knife and fork. You'll maybe even have to teach them how to use a toothbrush. A lot of them have just learned how to walk too, so just work on developing their motor skills, especially their fine motor skills that involve their fingers and stuff like that. The aim of the first year is to prepare them for what is coming for the rest of kindergarten. So the expectations for the end of the first year are the child enjoys coming to kindergarten and the child wants to try new things by themselves, and the child can maybe recognize basic numbers and basic vocabulary like colors and animals. The children might also have a collection of phrases that they use, like, can I go to the toilet? Or I want that one. Or yes please, no thank you. But other than that, they're still at the start of their journey when it comes to English. Very advanced children might already be able to make very simple sentences, but for the most part, children will still be learning. Just remember, this is the start of their journey and they have a long way to go before they can master English. They're only 3 years old and they're still learning how to speak their native language too. So just take things very gentle and very slow with them. Okay, so next we'll talk about children that are 3 to 4 years old. So generally these students have a basic understanding of vocabulary and simple phrases, but they'll still have many gaps in their knowledge. Children will now be introduced into more of a classroom routine and a classroom environment. So what I mean by that is they're not babies anymore, so they'll start being introduced to simple routine. As for their social skills, children will continue to be encouraged to share, and children will now be encouraged more to work with each other. As for independence, the children can do most things independently, but they may still need some help. Students will be encouraged to do things by themselves, but if they can't do it, the teacher will help. So the things that they might need help with are things like, wiping when they go to the toilet, or maybe even they simply don't understand sometimes. As for English, more vocabulary will be introduced at a higher pace and there'll be more phrases learnt in class. It will also feel more like a classroom environment rather than a daycare. So more phrases will be taught, very basic grammar will be introduced with be verbs and action verbs, with the main focus being vocabulary and action verbs. As for their reading, children will now be encouraged to recognize letters and numbers, so phonics should be the focus for this year. Try to learn the sounds of the letters and point attention to the starting letter of words. So for example, if you're using a flashcard, don't expect them to be able to read the word, but try and encourage them to look at the first letter of the word. If they start to be able to read, that's great, but don't expect them to. As for writing, children will be introduced to pencils and things like that for the first time. Children will be taught how to hold a pencil correctly, and children will be encouraged to try and write their name. The focus this year should be on tracing and holding a pencil steady. It's important that writing remains fun for them, so don't push the children to start something which is too difficult, as they may end up not liking what they're doing, and that will make things harder in the future. If their motor skills are strong enough, feel free to introduce uppercase letter tracing a few months in. As for numbers, I'd focus on teaching numbers 1 to 20 with more numbers introduced depending on the class level. So if the children still can't understand 1 to 10, just concentrate on that until it's very strong and then move on to the next numbers. But by the end of the year, a good target to aim for would be numbers 1 to 20. And remember, this isn't just counting 1 to 20, this is recognizing the numbers 1 to 20. So if you show a random number, say it's 7, they should be able to say 7. Physical notes are that children now have much more energy, So there will be a lot of physical activities to develop their balance and fine motor skills and hand-eye coordination. Whoever is teaching them will likely be very tired because this year is when they start moving around. They will also have a short attention span, so lessons must be very engaging and must be very short. As for things like using the bathroom, most kids can use the bathroom themselves by now, but some students may still need help. If you're not comfortable with that, just ask another teacher to help you. As for parent and teacher expectations at the end of the year, by the end of the year, your children should now be able to communicate in English. Your children might still make grammar mistakes, but the meaning of most sentences should be understandable by native speakers. They should now have a large vocabulary ready for next year when they'll start more on their grammar. So children should now be able to follow all classroom instructions and should be well on their way to learning English. Don't worry if you have weaker students that are still very far behind. A lot of children learn at different speeds, so that's okay, but it will be next year where things start to pick up. Okay, so next let's talk about students that are 4 to 5 years old. So generally at this age, students should now be able to understand the teacher and should be able to be taught more advanced topics. Children should now be introduced to simple grammar, and they may also be introduced to simple worksheets. Just make sure that when you introduce worksheets, they're very easy, because the concept of using a worksheet is very difficult for children at this age. As adults, we look at worksheets and we can dissect them like second nature, like, oh, 1, we start there. But for a kid, everything's moving around on the page and they have no idea what to do. So make sure when you do worksheets, you do them together first on the board. You show them what to do, you have some kids try it out, and then you do the worksheet. As for social skills, children are now expected to know how to behave, and students will have more responsibilities, and you should encourage them to help their friends. Students will also be expected to remember their routines. So at this stage, you want the children to listen to you and then to be able to perform what you've told them. This way, it's going to be less work for you and you can concentrate more on what they're going to learn rather than always taking care of them. As for independence, students should now be independent and the teachers should be able to instruct the children verbally. So what I mean by that is they should be able to listen to you and then do what you've told them without having any help. Of course, there'll be times where they don't understand, but for the most part, they should be able to do what you ask. As for their English, as long as they've been at kindergarten for 2 years, the children should now be able to communicate quite well and have a very large vocabulary of words to draw off. Now the children can start learning how to make new sentences using grammar, but be very careful with your pacing here. There'll be a lot to learn next year, so don't think that you have to teach them everything this year. Just make sure they have the core skills they need to learn more next year. So what I mean by that is, if this year they learn how to make very basic be-verb sentences and action verb sentences, this is enough, okay? If they know their sentence order and they're trying to make sentences, they're already at a good stage. So don't try and push them too hard and don't try to teach them too much because you'll just confuse them. Build up their foundation and their core skills rather than have them remember something by memory. So as for their reading, continue focusing on phonics. Make sure that their phonics skills are very strong, then move on to blending letters together. So things like d, a, g and k, a, t. Make sure you do everything together as a group and then just ask the children to answer. This is where you want them to try and blend the words together, try and say words, okay? They don't have to be able to read full sentences, but if they can blend simple words together, that is a great start for a child that's 4 to 5 years old. Sight words may also be introduced gradually throughout the year, so words that aren't phonetic, that you just want them to try and remember. Usually children remember this by it just being written on the board, or maybe you have some flashcards made that you work through, but the main focus should be on blending words with phonetics. Do not rush their reading and writing. Remember to focus on teaching them the core skills that they'll need for next year, rather than have them remember some sentences off by heart. It's going to help them more if they have the core skills that they need to be able to try reading, rather than just remembering something randomly in their head. Really pay attention to how difficult it is for them, and if what you're teaching them is still too difficult in terms of reading and writing, then back off. Back off. It doesn't matter if you feel like you're rewinding the clock to the year before. You need to get them skills strong before you can build on them. As for writing, your children should now be able to hold a pencil and write their name. They may even be able to write a few letters, but most likely they'll be very rough. Introduce uppercase letter tracing and be sure to model it on the board before you let them write it. Remember that you don't need to teach them A to Z straight away, so just concentrate on 1 or 2 letters a day until they can write the whole sheet, and then keep reviewing the sheet. They'll be slow at first, but the only way for them to get better is by practicing. And after a few months, they'll develop the muscle memory and they'll be able to write at a really great consistent speed. Feel free to try writing basic 3-letter words after they're strong enough, but be careful not to overwhelm them. You may also introduce lowercase tracing after uppercase, but only if uppercase seems too easy. So remember that the main goal of writing this year is just to develop their muscle memory and their letters. If you can ask a child to write the letter C or B and they can do it, they're at a good place. As for numbers, I think 1 to 50 is a good goal, and also ordinals. So we'll start with the 1 to 50, which means not only counting 1 to 50, but being able to recognize numbers 1 to 50. And that doesn't mean that you have to start teaching that at the start of the year. They should already know numbers 1 to 20, maybe even 1 to 30. But if you can add another 10 on top of that, you do 1 to 40 or 1 to 45, and then just keep building on that until they're at 50. You'll be tempted to go from 1 to 100 and maybe even higher than that, but try to build their core skills. They're gonna be able to do 1 to 100 next year, so there's no rush. Just make sure their skills are nice and strong. As for ordinals, this is things like being able to read a calendar, first, second, third, and things like that. I'd start by just doing a simple game. Maybe you do a race, and then you have the children say, blah 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 was first, blah 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 was second, blah 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 was third, okay? So just introduce it, first, second, third. They're the most difficult ordinals to master, and then after that it's quite similar, fourth, fifth, and so on. Physical notes. So children are more mature now. They'll still misbehave, but for the most part they'll be mature. This year, a lot of your students will start to lose their front teeth and will have growth spurts too. So now they're starting to grow up. Now they're really starting to build their muscle and get stronger now and getting taller and stuff like that. They will still have a short attention span, but it will be slightly longer than the year before. The children no longer need help in the bathroom. As for parent and teacher expectations, by the end of the year, your students should be able to converse with you and their friends in English. They should be able to make their own sentences and ask a few questions too. They may still have a few grammar errors when they speak, but for the most part, they should be able to speak. They are also comfortable with using a pencil and can now do simple worksheets. They still have trouble reading and writing, but those skills will be refined in the final year. Okay, so now for the final year of kindergarten. The children are 5 to 6 years old. Generally, students will now be completely independent, and students should be speaking and listening in English. Their English should be good enough that they're telling each other jokes and stuff like that. And remember, this is their final year at kindergarten, and now they can feel it. They're excited, but they're also nervous. This is the year where they'll have the most fun and learn the most too. As for their social skills, children now have a lot of responsibilities. They'll be asked to do many things for the teacher, and at times they'll be asked to help the younger children too during school events or something like that. Now they are the big kids and they know that, and the aim for this year is to prepare them for elementary school. Independence. Students should now be completely independent. Students should raise their hand if they need help, and now it's crucial that the children do everything by themselves, because next year it will be a totally new environment and they'll be expected to do so. As for their English, now the children will have more grammar to learn. They will review the targets that they did last year, maybe with more advanced grammar, and this year is the last year to improve their English skills. Remember that many of the children you're teaching might go to a school where English isn't the first language spoken. So it's our goal to have the children so confident in their English that they'll carry on using it and be proud of it. As for reading, phonics should still be reviewed, but the teacher should focus on reading now. Reading words and very short sentences. Reading will still be difficult at first, but as long as you're consistent with the way that you teach them, the children should be reading about halfway through the year. They should be able to start reading what you write on the board now too. Maybe they don't know at first, but just keep at it. Keep writing on the board, and gradually the children will start to be able to understand. Writing. So now children should be able to write uppercase letters and maybe even lowercase letters. Their skills will still need to be refined, however, but review the letter tracing within the first 2 months and then practice writing simple words. If your children are still not ready, that's okay. Just keep practicing lowercase letters until their muscle memory is adequate. The key for writing and reading is to go at the children's pace. Don't go too fast because you'll lose everything that they've learnt before. You have to build their foundation before you can put any more on top. So just make sure that they're ready to start writing words before you finish the tracing sheets. Keep in mind that writing is the last thing to learn in English, and it's far more useful for your students to be able to speak, listen and read. They're still 5 years old, so don't expect them to be Shakespeare just yet. As for numbers, concentrate on numbers 1 to 100. Make sure you review at the start of the year to see how much they know. If their numbers 1 to 20 are still weak, then do 1 to 20. If their numbers 1 to 10 are still weak, then do 1 to 10. Start at their level and then build them up. After they can recognize numbers 1 to 100, then move on to simple addition. This can be 6 months down the line, so don't rush into it. There's no point in doing simple addition if they can't recognize numbers that well yet. Make sure it's at their level. Build them up. It's very, very important that you don't just breeze through this, okay? This is the last year that you get to teach them the numbers, so just concentrate. After they know their numbers, test them on their ordinals. See if they can do ordinals. After they've mastered ordinals, move on to simple addition. Before you do any simple addition, every lesson, just quickly review some numbers, okay? Just check that their numbers are still solid. This way, you'll know if you're ready to move on. After simple addition, move on to simple subtraction. If they can do simple subtraction, then move on to skip counting. But make sure it's at their level. Don't think that you have to teach them addition if they're not ready yet. Just concentrate on making their numbers very, very strong. Okay, so physical notes. They're the big kids now and they love to run everywhere at this age. So they're expected to behave nicely at this age, and they're also the role models for the younger students. So just let them know that, and let them know that that's the reason why they should set a good example, and they're less likely to run. They may still run, but that's just kind of kids being kids, right? Okay, so parent and teacher expectations by the end of this year. By the end of the year, your students should now be able to tell you how much they're going to miss you when they leave kindergarten. They should be able to articulate their thoughts easily and shouldn't need long to process information. They should have solid number skills and an understanding of basic mathematics. But they're probably going to do these mathematics again in elementary school, so don't worry if they're not so strong on that. They should be able to read simple English books and should be able to read words of the vocabulary words that they know. Their writing will be still a little hit and miss at this point, but they're still young, so it can't be helped. They can probably write letters consistently, but they may still misspell a lot of words. If they can write a sentence quite quickly, then that's good enough for me, even if there are mistakes. Other students may not be able to write too well, but as long as they can read, they will be able to improve later in their lives. Okay, so I hope all this information was useful to you, and remember again that all kindergartens and all students are different. So I'd say that the information above is quite ambitious to teach kindergarten kids. So again, please remember that your kindergarten is most likely going to be easier and possibly less focus on grammar and reading and writing. So just make sure you check with your school first before you take any of the things that I've said on board. So have a great day and feel free to comment below if there's anything I've missed or anything else that you'd like me to go into more detail with. Just put that in the comments. Also, if you don't agree with something that I've said, put that in the comments too, because I think it's very, very beneficial for people who are watching this video to look through the comments and see another teacher's point of view on the matter. Okay, so that's everything. I hope it was helpful, and goodbye. See you next time.